Thank you, John. And I want my introduction. I always need it. You know, if anybody needs it, it's me. Thank you. It's awkward to be in agreement with everything that's been said before me. You know, it makes me think that this community has become more and more incestuous because we're so happy to be making such big steps for design and for design criticism that we're always huddling. So I'm not going to look for something to disagree with. I'm actually going to embrace even more what's been said, but I'm going to tell you a little more about my impact with criticism. When I came to the United States from Italy 19 years ago, I had a very European sense of this mixture of reporting and criticism. I never thought of them as separate. You know, Alice just said that reporting in her mind is the bedrock of criticism, and to me instead, they were all together. There was no real distinction, and I had an absolute reverence for journalism. Like, it was to me the most important thing that I could aspire to besides being a curator. Interestingly, I immediately noticed when I came here that there was a distinction between criticism and reporting that was being imposed on, you know, different writers, for instance, at the New York Times. And I had many friends in the House and Home section at that time, I don't remember how it was called, you know, it changed title a few times, that were telling me, oh, we absolutely cannot express our own ideas. We cannot be critical. And instead, there were anointed critics at the time. There was Herbert Mouchamp, whom I learned so much with, that were all about expressing opinions. And I have noticed the evolution of those two positions in the years that came after that arrival, and understood that there's a little bit of resentment these days against critics by critics themselves. Very interestingly, the art community itself started poking fun at art critics last year. Hyperallergic published this great post about international art speak that is typical of not only art galleries press release, but also art critics. And at the same time, I started noticing a certain nausea that not only took me over, but took over also the world at large when looking at criticism as really like this kind of arrogant expression of one-sided opinions. But at the same time, I noticed the coming of age of a new kind of criticism by people that didn't mind making themselves vulnerable, that didn't mind expressing opinion that maybe are not right, why don't you tell me what you think? People that were critical enough as to begin a dialogue. Interestingly, this kind of criticism is also what certain curators do, certainly what I like to do, and also what certain designers do. Designers, critics, and curators are coming together right now under the edges of ambiguity, vulnerability, open-endedness. It's about asking the right questions, which is something that I've learned from Fiona Raby and Tony Dunne more than anybody else, so by practicing critical designers. And it's about really saying, you know what I'm putting in front of you is not finite, which is something that I learned from my own show, Design and the Elastic Mind, where I wasn't able to sleep until 2 days before the opening of the show, because I was sure that it was so non MoMA in its question marks abounding everywhere that I thought I would be crucified. And instead, sure enough, when you leave some space for people to come in and express opinions, the dialogue becomes much more enriching, the criticism becomes collective and not individualistic. I'll tell you some interesting understanding of criticism that happened lately when the Nexus of Things is actually the title that the students, the DCRIT students of this year gave to my talk, which comes from the fact that I don't use words like nexus. I mean, I do, but in more discursive ways. But it comes from the idea that I believe that design is the most important discipline in the world, and that it will be at the nexus of things in the future out of necessity, because the work we're doing is so important that it'll be recognized. So that's simply the title of the whole lecture. But I wanted to tell you about an episode, a recent episode. MoMA started acquiring video games. We started with 14 out of a wish list of 40. I published a blog post, and there was like 500 comments to the blog post, and very few of them were snarky. Most of the comments were about the fact you're missing my favorite video game. Well, this is great, but where's my favorite video game, and so on and so forth. But it was really quite great. And I was expecting a lot of pushback from some of the critics. But truly, it didn't happen that much. You know, we had, you know, we showed some of the games that we were acquiring. Pac-Man was part of it, Tetris, original version. And, you know, so much went into this acquisition. We worked on it for a year and a half because you need to establish certain criteria, and we wanted to use interaction design as a funnel into the collection. So what are the criteria? What are the games? What do we acquire? Whom do we ask? So there was so much that went into it. And in the case of Tetris, I'm very proud to say we went to the original designer, Alexei Pajitnov. He came to MoMA, between parentheses. He came to MoMA like a month ago. I had never met him. And when I saw him, I was trying to be proper. When I saw him, I just like hugged him. I just like threw my arms around him. It was such an emotion to see Alexei Pajitnov, who still in the Soviet Union designed Tetris. But so you see, we really worked hard on which video games. There were no video games. There were really gratuitous violence, but we had Portal where you shoot. It's a first-person shooter, but you shoot through walls, and it's a wonderful platform. We thought of the code. We tried to acquire the code. So really serious, you know, Flow is another one of the games, and you know, they're now installed in the galleries in the Applied Design exhibition, together with other examples of design. They're displayed with you know, furniture, with other objects, and they're displayed using the same stratagem that Philip Johnson used in 1934 to establish design as a category worthy of the Museum of Modern Art. What he did at that time is he took propeller blades and ball bearings and put them on white pedestals against white walls as if they were Brancusi sculptures, so created a distance that pushed for a new perspective on those objects. And we're doing the same for video games by eliminating any kind of arcade paraphernalia, no nostalgia whatsoever. It's you, the screen with the game, and the controller, that's it. So it's an attempt to really decontextualize them. So lots of thought goes into it. What happens, you know, the New York magazine, you know, approval matrix puts us in the right quadrant, albeit without you know, like unbalancing too much. So we're in brilliant highbrow, but just a little bit so. But then here comes Jonathan Jones from The Guardian. So if you think about it, this is all a matter of context, and that's why critics really have to think of the context. As curators, we took video games that were initially designed by designers to be in the entertainment context. We took them out, we moved them into an interaction design context, and here comes Jonathan Jones, and he looks at video games from a viewpoint of the august halls of MoMA with Matisse's and Picasso, and all of a sudden there are like these outrageous video games. So, sorry MoMA, video games are not art. Interestingly, you know, nobody likes to be criticized, and usually you hurt when somebody has something bad to say about what you've done. But this, in this case, did not happen. I was reading this review, and I felt like I was watching the Apollo Theater stage and somebody really singing off tune and about to be kicked out. And you know, when you're really cringing for the person, because it was coming from a completely different context. So criticism very often is a matter of context, and that was proven by the fact that The Guardian itself, only the video game writers, wrote back to their critics saying, hey, you're wrong, they do belong there. Not to mention John Maida, unprompted by me, who just started publishing in Wired Online magazine, video games do belong in the MoMA. So this whole diatribe started, but my favorite criticism article appeared in The New Republic, which now has been relaunched by Chris Hughes to great fanfare, and there was this really, really pretentious writer with many last names and a few titles to spare that wrote all this thing, you know, but look at the last lines. Video games aren't art because they are quite thoroughly something else. Code. So Picasso is not art because it is oil paint. So you understand there is something really missing in that thought, which is the idea of process and of understanding design. Designers and curators do something that not all critics understand. They talk about the future. They posit questions that are critical and that push us forward. You know, and this is a really great quote by Stephen Poole: video games will shape the worlds we will all inhabit tomorrow. Designers and curators try to do it a little bit. Well, I certainly am proud of Design and the Elastic Mind, which is a show from 2008 that definitely went into this direction, almost too literally, because I'm such a sci-fi fan that I couldn't help myself. But you know, if I go back in time and I look at 1939, curators before me were doing the same. If you look at these cubist paintings at the Demoiselles d'Avignon, they were about a new world. They were not that different in spirit and gestalt from the new city that you saw in Design and the Elastic Mind. So much so that some of the loans to that exhibition were held in customs because customs thought they were not art. So there you go. It's not about what things are. It's about how they should be, could be, or would be. That's the kind of dimension where we work. And sometimes it's easy to have new types of acquisition enter the museum. You know, the digital typeface acquisition was relatively easy. It was a logistical issue, but in a way, fonts were already considered part of design. I had a little bit of a harder time with some biodesign. I was able to insert easily into the collection Dressing the Meat of Tomorrow, the idea that if meat can be developed in vitro, you could also possibly give it the shape that you want. So that was an experimental idea that went fine. I didn't even try with victimless leather, Symbiotica, because I knew already that I would be slammed down, also because of the logistical issues of having a live acquisition into the collection. And interestingly, biojewelry was slammed down by my acquisitions committee because they said it was jewelry which is not collected by MoMA. So it's very interesting how sometimes context, once again, is an issue. The @sign took me a really, really long time to convince other colleagues, but not the members of the committee. You know, we wanted to prove, together with Kate Carmody, who's the curatorial assistant that I work so closely with, we wanted to prove that the @sign stood as a new type of acquisition that comes from the public domain. It's an acquisition that is conceptual, not virtual because it's real, but it's conceptual in that everybody owns it. So it's about taking the shadow of a butterfly that projects it on the wall as it goes by. But there was a lot behind it. So we're going progressively into difficulty of acquisition. The Menstruation Machine by Sputniko, which, as many of you know who have heard me talk about it, was my favorite object in Talk to Me exhibition. That was a really hard sell because it was so polarizing. Had it been considered art and not design, I would have probably had an easier time, just like I'm not allowed to acquire guns into the design collection, as Barbara Eldridge knows very well, but of course there are a lot of guns that are in the art collection. Why? Because design has this honesty in theory and in principle, and this kind of transparency. What you see is what you get. Therefore, a gun is a tool to kill. A gun is not a criticism of tools that kill when it's in the design collection. Similarly, for Sputniko, the shock effect of this wonderful contraption that enables men to experience a period, a real period from beginning to end, was a little too much to be understood by the kind of context that I had around me. The 747, as you know, is my other wish acquisition. I really would like to have it. No, I mean, I really, really want it, and I will have it. It doesn't have to be in the garden, can keep on flying. I have to make a deal with an airline. Right now, it's put on hold once again because there's this idea still that we need to have the object on place, and we need to move beyond that. So you see, I realized that in my work as a curator, I do tend towards criticism that is a very vulnerable criticism, if you wish, but criticism nonetheless of what existed beforehand. It's a criticism that is very similar to the kind of design that so many of us embrace here, the kind of design that is always activist, communicative, experimental, responsive, and open and visionary, but it is also vulnerable and ambiguous. We really like that dimension, and it's the dimension that we will live in more and more in the future. I like to use the slide that actually comes from Fiona and Toni that shows old design versus new design, you know, what design used to be when we were looking at Dieter Rams and when we were looking at Castiglioni, and it was affirmative and problem solving. That's my favorite one, problem solving. Such a wonderful cliche, while now all we want is good problem finding. So all of the moves from a very affirmative and a very closed and canonical old school form of design to instead the ambiguous, open-ended, and vulnerable form that we embrace today. It doesn't mean that in the past design was not already like that. I mean, if you think of the radical architecture and design in the 1960s, late 1960s and early 1970s in Europe, this is super studio, it's not dissimilar in spirit from what Fiona and Toni did 2 years ago, the foragers. It's about thinking of possible futures, and it's about trying to mend fences with nature, with society, before catastrophes happen or right after catastrophes happen. Similarly, Hausrucker, the great architects and designers in Vienna, once again, late 1960s, early 1970s, and their mind-expanding helmets were attempts to explain possible networking in the future. They were almost like advanced thoughts about the internet. And they're not dissimilar from my beloved fifth-dimensional camera by Anna Jain and other colleagues, which is an attempt to give you a sense of the theory of the many universes, of the multidimensional quality of the universe that really surrounds us and that we're not able to perceive because of our limitedness as human beings. Enzo Mari in 1974, with his Autoprogettazione, was already talking about the political idea that everybody's a designer, and today you can also add everybody's a curator. He was already talking about it, albeit in much more Marxist and violent and vehement tones. And it's not dissimilar to the more poetic and still sustainability-ridden thoughts of Martino Gamper and his work of 100 Chairs in 100 Days. The difference between Mari and Gamper is that Mari went on thundering against the powers that be and the establishment, while Martino has his objects sold in art galleries, but that's a problem that we will discuss, or hopefully one of our students will discuss in the future. And it's not dissimilar from the thoughts today of maker culture, the idea that everybody is a designer that we are so hearing about today. Tibor Kalman used irony as a weapon, as a knife, when he started with Oliviero Toscani Colors magazine. I remember I was a very proper Milanese girl when this launched. I was in Milan. I was having, you know, everything was cool. I had my uniform to go to school, and I was so outraged by Colors magazine. It was really like so in your face. Well, that's what it was supposed to be. And I remember when the issue with the Black Queen Elizabeth came out, it was quite irresistible. The same kind of irony does not cut you in the face that much today, but it still works. This is Ralph Borland's Suited for Subversion, which is a contraption that you're supposed to wear to protect yourself from the batons of the police when you are protesting. It also has other interesting features, like a camera on top of your head that films the action, and a loudspeakers over your heart that expands your heartbeat in an almost threatening way. Politics is a normal and very habitual and easy and comfortable place for many designers to be. I like politics in all kinds when it relates to design. For instance, the work of Cameron McNall that designed homeless shelters not only as cozy and warm and protective shelters, but also as very colorful things that would make homeless people very visible, because he thought that invisibility was the real problem with homelessness and the reason why it never got really solved. Politics of similar kind in the work of Laura Kurgan and her colleagues in the $1 Million Blocks, a red on black map of Brooklyn and other parts of cities in the United States that shows the levels of entropy, the money that the government spends to keep some inhabitants of the block either in prison or in halfway houses. Data that are available publicly, designed and visualized in a way that makes them unforgettable and outrageous. Josh On's They Rule from 2004, one of the first instances of a transparent approach to the possible collusions and conflicts of interest amidst boards, corporate boards in the United States and areas of the government of the US. And to talk about politics and visualization, Diller, Scofidio, Renfro, Ben Rubin, and many other, and Laura Kurgan and many other collaborators, amazing visualization exits that was conceived for the exhibition Native Land by Paul Virilio in Paris in 2008. A gigantic theater that critically explained that today humanity is defined by migration, and showed how different parts and different populations in the world had been displaced by either man-made or natural disasters. So a real effort has been made by so many designers, and these are the designers that people like us, that critics like us really support, not because we think that our role is, as critics or as curators, to thunder and deliver truths, but because we feel that our role is to further criticism, is to push it forward so that it can continuously be applied, as John was saying, by everybody to everything that is around us. Criticism is something that should be shared with the masses. It's not about us being on a pulpit and delivering it to the people. It's about sharing it and making sure that it becomes a virus. Talking about vulnerability and criticism, I particularly like how some designers are also able to look at themselves today with honesty that was not really part of the trade in the past. I'm talking, for instance, about Project H. You might know them, the couple from California that started out brilliantly when they were 25 years old by trying to redesign the Hippo roller, top left, which is a South African engineering design from the 1970s. They found it inefficient and therefore tried to address it by redesigning it in an almost like a very earnest but completely misguided way, because they did not take into account, once again, what the context of Africa and production means in Africa. After that failure, they recognized that the only way to truly be socially responsible and have an effect on the so-called local societies is to be local. And so they moved to North Carolina, and they spent a year in Asheville with the inhabitants of the city, teaching them how to use design to improve their own destinies. And at the end of the year, the citizens and the students produced a new farmers market stand and a new fabulous chicken coop. That's a sense of criticism that is actually really taken in and metabolized. A lot of this attitude also comes from understanding one's own patrimony. And in this case, Masoud Hassani's Mind Detonator, that has become really famous lately and that is also in the MoMA collection, stands as a really good example. It's not perfect. There's a long way to go to make it really applicable and to make it really producible all over the world, but the intentions, the heart is so strong. Masoud is 27 now, or 28, and when he was a child, he grew up in northern Afghanistan, in a part of the country that was really war-torn. So his brother and their friends used to play next to minefields and used to make this kind of wind-powered paper toys that would roll sometimes onto the minefields and that they could not retrieve. Also, Masoud had friends that had lost limbs. And when he found himself having to do his thesis project at the Eindhoven Academy of Design 2 years ago, he just dug back into his own life and decided to make a dandelion-like mine detonator that is powered by the wind, that is heavy enough as to explode mines, but light enough as to be able to move, and that is made of bamboo and plastic, therefore very easy materials that can be reproduced all over the world. All the intentions are good. There needs to be a lot of work that is given to it to make it real. But nonetheless, the kind of humanity, human charge in the design is what makes it particularly compelling, as is the case of the work of Forma Fantasma. Forma Fantasma, also from Eindhoven, are two Italian designers. They are a couple. They're from Sardinia and from Sicily. And about 4 years ago, they decided to look at the resins, at the organic resins of southern Italy, and to recuperate them in their design to show that there's a sustainable way to design that really looks to material culture, a sort of slow design, very similar to the slow food concept, which is about looking at locally sourced materials that sometimes are not your immediately understandable ones. So they beautifully showed this series of vessels made with straw and honeybees wax and other organic resins. I also like very much when the humanity of the people that design is meant for is recuperated by some designers. Sometimes a humanity that is almost erotic or basic in its sensuality. The Smell Plus project by Auger and Loiseau from a few years ago was very funny. It was a dating agency that was based on smell. So if you see there's a wall between these two people, they're only sniffing each other. And interestingly, many designers are working on that. And after actually showing that project in Design on the Elastic Mind, I found out that such an agency existed, of all places, where in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I also like very much the work of Emiliana Design. There are two designers from Barcelona that really work on something that Fred would probably love. It's all candies, you know, there are chocolate nipples up on top, and then at the bottom, even lovelier, candies that you put between your toes and that your lover is supposed to suck away from your toes. One thing that we haven't really spoken about and that I hope we will never touch on in this conference is the difference between design and art. Interestingly, it doesn't really matter to us. It matters to people that are outside of our realm or that still think of the old kind of criticism. Like, I never hear that question coming from hyperallergic reporters, the ones that were criticizing international art speak. But I might hear that question coming from the critics that thundered against the video games. And to that, sometimes I give them as examples some of these beautiful objects by students of the Eindhoven Academy. These come from an exhibition, 2006 exhibition about death. These students all worked on the theme of death, coming out with portable coffins or banquets for funerals. One student really movingly chronicled her whole history with cancer doing comics, and she couldn't come to the opening because she died beforehand. So there was really an attempt to communicate. We were talking before about the fact that curators, critics, and even designers need an audience. There's this attempt to really share what we think with the public that is most important. And there's also the attempt to try and respond or create open doors that refer to the most basic human needs. Another example here are these biodegradable little coffins by Brigitte Koremans that are for babies that are actually for embryos that were aborted before term, before 24 weeks, because in Holland, you're not supposed, or you cannot have a real burial before 24 weeks. So it's a way to give parents a sense of real closure and a sense of ritual. This is all design that has nothing to do with Braun clocks, and it has nothing to do even with the fabulous Castiglioni chairs. It has to do, on the other hand, with some 3D printed chairs. It has to do with other objects, like slow design objects, like the beautiful, if you've gone to see the Adhocracy exhibition, you've seen the beautiful Solar Sinter, Marcus Kaiser bowls that are also in MoMA collection. It has to do with this sense of experimenting with a world of resources and production means that is completely new and that is projected towards the future. That's why I want to go back to this particular slide that I think is so meaningful and that you should all take a picture of. By the way, Fiona, maybe you'll tell us later where it comes from, because it's not, is it yours? Yes. Completely yours, you made it? Yes. Oh, it's fabulous. I use it all the time. I wanted to make sure that I credit it rightly. And it's important also to be critical of design itself as a discipline. I'm working right now on a project that I find truly fascinating. I'm working on it together with Jamer Hunt from Parsons, from the Transdisciplinary Design course in Parsons, that is an old friend and a great design critic and theoretician, so much better than I am. It's a project that's called, well, it's called A History of Violence, but we have to change the title. I want to call it Ceres, which is the goddess of violent death, but Jamer doesn't really like it. So right now it's just called Design and Violence. We'll get to it at some point. But it's based on that famous Papanek opening phrase that says that there are some professions that are more dangerous than design, but not too many. Design seems so positive and seems so giving and so optimistic, but in truth, there's always a double-edged sword, and there's always an agenda that can be found behind it. And we're trying to really look at the dark side of design without looking at overt forms of violence. You know, for instance, you see up on top left, Revital Cohen's Me Against the Machine, which is a great software program that enables you to scratch your computer and make it bleed when it keeps on crashing or doesn't respond properly. On the right-hand side top, you have Andrew Friend, another RCA student. It's a machine that enables you to feel the whole brunt of a lightning without dying. So it's a lightning rod that has just enough insulation for you not to die, but to feel the whole thing. And then at the bottom, these green bullets that are very sustainable because they're lead-free, so they won't damage the environment, but they'll still kill you. Coupled with it all, there's this beautiful object by Chris Wobkin. It's an object, it's a contraption that enables you to wrestle with a beetle. This beetle is actually the strongest animal in nature in rapport to his size. And the contraption enables you to scale down your strength so that you are as strong as a beetle, you're a peer. And so you can arm wrestle with him, which is quite a beautiful way to think of the dimensions of the future. You know, I have had to burn quite a few chairs to get to that, and I've had to try and change the understanding of design both at MoMA and inside MoMA amongst the curators and amongst the audiences. But it has not been that difficult. It's been all worth it. What I have to remind myself all the time is to make sure to remain vulnerable and to remain open to criticism, even though it hurts so much. So as critics, as curators, and as designers, we have to embrace criticism, but we also have to be critical of it. Thank you very much.
For a few moments here, and we'll get the conference a little behind time, but
did I go over a lot?
No, you were fine. You were
Okay,
fine.
good.
We started late, but I want to keep us on time because part of the whole mission here is for us to collaborate and really have a sense of community here today. But anyway, it's always great to talk to you. A couple of things. I feel like a critic this week because I got to see the very early version of the From Chaos to Couture punk exhibit up at the Met, Uptown. You've heard of the Met, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've heard
I've
of
heard of it.
They have some guns up there too. You ought to go
I
see
know,
them.
they have
yeah,
some
they have a
great
lot of
guns.
guns, tons of guns,
Barbara knows them
weapons,
all.
and yes, indeed. And you know, while it's hard for me to evaluate what the criticism would be of the museum show about punk up at the Met, it will certainly be a huge happening here in New York. The insight that I got out of it is it's extraordinary, and I would recommend it only for this reason. Go up there and just watch the Upper East Side women dressed in Prada looking intently at mannequins that are giving them the finger. For that reason alone, it's worth going to. But the value that one would get from an exhibit like that, I think it speaks to the question of what criticism is all about. There's all kinds of tensions there. You can go decide for yourself what it is. My question for you is, what is the tension in your curatorial work between the need to educate and be definitive about what's come before and the impulse to introduce to people something that's fundamentally new that they would never have experienced anywhere else?
It's about connecting the two. First of all, I think you're so right about the punk exhibition. It's really daring. I can't wait to go see it because I want to see how Andrew dealt with it, because it's so odd. But between the past and the present and the future, the tension is very constructive. You just never forget it. You know, it's like, you know, right now I showed you some slides from the 1960s. I could also find some from the 1920s if I wanted to. Futurists, go. It's nice sometimes to remind people that human beings have been brilliant for millennia. It's just that we're brilliant today with different tools. So I like that. I like to always have a very strong core of theory in everything that I propose. I don't mean to drive anybody crazy with too much theory, but I want a concept to shine through, and then the examples can be taken from different parts of history.
So it's more important that the concept feel new than the objects and the references feel new?
To give you an example, the at sign, it's from the Middle Ages. The first findings were amongst manuscripts by the monks. The monks used it to fuse the preposition ad. And today, it is completely intrinsic to our nature and to our identity in Twitter handlers, in our email accounts. That's the perfect example. That's why I'm so proud of that acquisition, because it also speaks to how you relate to the past and how you bring it to the present.
There are a lot of Saudis who have 747s, probably extra ones, who could help you out with that.
But you know, I don't want it. So to tell you about the 747, I had worked it already all out with lawyers. So it's about MoMA licensing its name to an airline. So the airline maintains the whole responsibility, liability, profits, everything else. But you can put the accession number on the outside. Next, I checked with the FTA? No, the FAA. Thank you.
Yeah.
The FDA. I'm like, no, Food and Drug Administration. I don't think so. So you can put the accession number there. So it looks like it's a MoMA plane. It's the airline's plane, but it's the MoMA acquisition, right? So it keeps on flying.
And of course, it's built by Boeing, which turns 100 in 2015. So you can probably get them involved.
They would be completely involved. Everybody's ready, except a few people.
Exactly. Are curators innocent bystanders to a process that's going on outside of the museum, or is the better role of a curator as a guilty intervener into what's going on in the conversation about design?
I hope I'm a guilty intervener. I hope so. I don't want to be on the outside. I trained as an architect. I consider much of what I do a design process, and I think it is about creating baselines and trampolines for something that's already happening, especially because I'm at MoMA and I have the power and the authority of the institution behind me. I can really give some solid ground, some firm ground that designers that are kind of wobbly because they're doing something experimental can put under their feet. So I like to think that I'm building steps.
You describe your influence. I mean, you are a tremendously influential person because you have the imprimatur of the MoMA behind you. Is that influence sometimes as much a burden as it is an advantage?
It's never a burden when it comes to my work. It's a burden sometimes when it comes to my identity, because it's hard for me to understand whether I would be anything without having the titles and the MoMA afterwards, you know. So it's personal, it's not professional. Professionally, it's always an advantage.
As a journalist, it's always fun to make someone miserable on stage. And so isn't it outrageous that there are no guns in the design collection at the MoMA? Because in fact, one of the problems with the gun debate right now in America is that people don't have a tangible sense of what guns are, particularly the ones who criticize them.
No, it's not completely wrong. You know, one of the first proposals that I made when I started at MoMA 19 years ago was a Beretta. Like, you know, coming from Italy, hey, we need to have a Beretta. And they told me not really. And so I tried to understand. Because it seemed also moralist and wrong. But the truth is that there's an idea of design and MoMA, this idea of modern, that modern is everything that does not hide the process of its making, does not hide its goals. So there's a sort of transparency and morality to the kind of design that we show. So when you are in a more generic design or acquisitive or documentation of history kind of museum, I think you should have guns. But in this particular case, the way design was structured, the presence of design was structured at MoMA, it does not make sense. I'm not saying that it cannot change, and I cannot tell you, Barbara and I have had this discussion forever, and when we were acquiring the video games, we excluded video games that had gratuitous violence. For instance, there's no Grand Theft Auto in the selection, because we were not interested in that kind of interaction, in going around crashing cars and shooting prostitutes, right? So, and that's what you do if you're not good at GTA. But it's a moral dilemma that sits with me.
But is it a limiting dogma that doesn't allow the MoMA to have a window into a whole feature of culture? For instance, doesn't the MoMA have a responsibility to comment and intervene in the question of the first 3D gun that was produced this week?
I intervened in it on Twitter by myself, very strongly.
A
but
3D
not as
printed gun,
Mona.
though,
Yeah.
that's a process you've talked about, but you would
Yeah.
not be involved in that?
No, I've been involved, denouncing it when it was first coming out a year ago, and then this week it's been fired. I mean, it happened a while ago. It's just the Huffington Post took it over and said it had been fired, so it became more viral. But we tweeted and talked about it, but we didn't show it as an example of great design, because that's what we show. We show positive examples there.
But isn't the idea that you can possess a weapon by having its downloaded specifications that can be sent to a printer anywhere in the world, isn't that a fundamentally different sort of relationship between object and designer that the MoMA needs to be on the edge of commenting on, whether it's a gun or not?
The MoMA was on the edge of 3D printing. The first exhibition and acquisitions that we made were in 2005, when 3D printing was about printing great objects and not only teacups. So in a way, we are right now, I am very excited about maker culture, but I'm also, and I was discussing it also with Joseph Grima at his Adocracy exhibition, which is an example of good 3D printed objects. It's time to be more, once again, critical of maker culture and to set some baselines of quality also for that.
Paola, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so here's how it's going to go. From here on out, it will be pairs of people. I will introduce two names. They will both come up, first the presenter, then the student. Then we will have them in pairs sitting here, and I'll pose some questions to them. We'll try to get a conversation going between them. Each one of the speakers was, the professional speakers, was chosen by one of the students, who then creates this pairing. And so part of the mission will be have a conversation to explore why this relationship exists from the student's perspective and from the presenter's perspective. Then at the end, we will have a panel of all of the presenters and take a look at all of the issues and themes that were referenced here today and some that maybe need to be referenced.